But let's go ahead and move into our first story, which is something that, well, it's been making a lot of headlines. That maybe people have seen this rise of right-wing activity, racist activity in Britain, and then also now we've seen over the past couple of days a very significant pushback starting to come from anti-racist there in the UK. So to get into all of what's happening, we are very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Roger McKenzie, who is the international editor of the Morning Star newspaper, a longtime anti-racist organizer himself, and also an executive committee member of the Communist Party of Britain. Roger, thank you so much for being back with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Well, great to have you here, because sorting through all this is important. We're just getting a lot of headlines, but not a lot of substance. I mean, maybe just give us a sense to start here. I mean, how did this start that these sort of mobs of racists started coming out into the street? What was going on that has kicked them up in this way?
Well, first thing to say is that I actually can't see you, Eugene, so I'm going to treat this as radio, basically. I don't know what's going on, but that's
well,
fine.
You look great.
Yeah, we can see you. We can see you. So
I'm on my holidays, so it's fine. It's fine. Well, the first thing is that 3 young girls got killed by a young boy, by the sounds of it. And the first thing I really want to say is to offer condolences to the family, for the families of the 3 young girls who got killed. And none of that should ever be politicized, the fact that people got killed. But the far right did. They decided that the boy who carried out these what he's alleged to have carried out the killings was an immigrant. And they decided to spread that lie around the internet, that the guy was an immigrant, that he was a Muslim, when in fact he wasn't an immigrant at all. Yes, he was a Muslim, but he was born and brought up in Wales. Now, this killing took place in Southport, but the far right used a load of Telegram channels to start spreading misinformation around, and soon turned out basically mobs into Southport, where this killing took place, and ransacked a mosque. Now, the really good thing that in terms of a response, because the response didn't take a week or even a few days to take place, the response to that ransacking of the mosque took place immediately by people in the local community condemning the far right for their actions, and actually within 24 hours rebuilding the damage that had been done. So black and white people coming together and rebuilding the damage that had been done to that mosque. So then immediately the anti-racist forces got together and stood up and started organising against the racists. But the racists decided that they were going to spread these riots, because that's what they were, across the country. They also decided that they were going to attack any lone black person that was walking down any street where they decided that they were going to mobilise and attempt to beat them up. And that's what they did in a number of places who had nothing to do with Southport. So places hundreds of miles away, in places like Middlesbrough, which is in the northeast of the country, in Manchester, long-time black community, long-time mixed community in a place like Manchester, but also in places like Belfast in Northern Ireland as well. They decided that they were going to march down the streets of Belfast and ransack any shop or any cafe or any home that looked like it had anything to do with any black person. The thing that I want to say in terms of a context for this, just to finish this bit, is that what we are seeing is immigration and refugee and asylum seeking being used as code. And it's a code for blackness. It's a code that says if you are black, then you are an immigrant, you are a refugee, you are an asylum seeker. And there's plenty of politicians from right the way across the so-called the mainstream political spectrum in Britain who are complicit in this because they've been stoking up racism for years. They've been playing the race card because they think that it'll either do them no damage or they're doing it because they think it will give them a plus point. So people in the governing Labour Party, people in the Conservative Party have been complicit in this. But what we've seen is that we've seen people standing up and organising and not prepared to see their communities taken over by the far right and are uniting together. And I think that's, out of all of this, that is something that's been good to see.
I want you to elaborate a bit on the sort of political atmosphere that's created a climate where we see this sort of thing happening in the streets. I appreciate that you mentioned that because a lot of the way this has been covered in the mainstream media that's given it attention is it's one of two ways. It's either there's just kind of these random mobs. It's really random. Yeah, it's like racist, but and it's or there's this other way of kind of just blaming it on the far right only, and mentioning far right figures like Tommy Robinson, and it's not to absolve them of responsibility. Of course, those people are responsible. However, there is a political climate that has led to the normalization of this sort of racism and hate directed at people who are darker and are perceived to basically not belong in the UK. And so I'm curious if you can speak a bit to that in terms of both Labour and the Tories, because it's not just the Tories here. It's not just these far right figures. And then also maybe to add to that a bit, I'm just curious, and you can tell me if this is a stretch, has the genocide in Gaza and the sort of atmosphere around that contributed at all to some of this racism?
Yeah, happy to talk about those. I think, I mean, when you look at the Labour Party, I mean, the easiest thing I can do is refer everybody to a piece that I've written in the Morning Star newspaper today, which is a feature that goes to some of this. And some of the key points that I make in that are really that this is years in the making. That these things don't just happen overnight. It's not just a spark and something happens. These things build up, and one of the things I talk about in this article is the way that the militarism that Britain is complicit in, the years of austerity that Britain is involved in, but also imperialism that Britain is, one of the foremost advocates, foremost countries that's involved in. When you add all those things together, what they actually do is that they create a whole picture. It's a zero-sum game, really, that says some people are benefiting at the expense of somebody else. Essentially, it's saying that people, the darker people, are benefiting at the expense of white people. So when a bunch of white people who've got nothing, listening to those sorts of things from the mainstream parties, and you're right, Rania, we hear that from the Labour Party and we hear it from the Conservative Party. In fact, just before the elections, what we heard was Keir Starmer, now the Prime Minister, saying things like the Bangladeshis should be made to leave. Right. Years before that, we had the Labour Party in one election producing. You were talking earlier on about the mug that you're using. I mean, we had the Labour Party had its own mug that says "End immigration." Or stop immigration. We've had Labour buying into the whole thing about stop the boats, which essentially is about migrants trying to get across from France, across the English Channel to Britain usually to escape a war that Britain's been part of or helped to start or whatever. So this is not stuff that's new. This is stuff that's all been created, this whole atmosphere, this whole language that basically says that, number one, black people, you are not really British. Number one. Secondly, black people, you are to blame for all the ills in this country will ignore the fact that there are more than 3 million millionaires in a country of 70 million in Britain, will ignore that for the moment and will say a few thousand people who are crossing the English Channel to try and get a better life, that it's their fault. And what we'll do is we'll say all of these people who are trying to worship their religion, minding their own business, it's their fault as well. And we'll stoke all this up because we think that we'll get some political capital out of it. And of course, what we know, Rania and Eugene, is that we know that this isn't just a British phenomenon. We know this is an international phenomenon, which is why the point about imperialism is really, really important, because it's an international kind of view that we have to take about this. Because you have it with Trump, you have it with the Democratic Party as well, about the way that they play the race card, without even blinking. Over the channel from Britain, we have France, where, as I understand it, Macron was hoping to have a national rally, so the fascist and Marine Le Pen's party win the elections, because he hoped that what was going to happen was that the French people would see how bad this was and, in the area of their ways, vote in another neoliberal term for Macron's coalition. So we know that sort of thing's happening. And what we have to do, and I'm really, really pleased that what we're seeing at the minute, is that we're seeing working class people, black and white, coming together and defending their communities. But more than that, I think it sends a really important message out there that says, more than we're just defending something, it's a positive message of working class unity, because I firmly believe we cannot trust politicians to deal with this stuff. We certainly can't trust the police to deal with this stuff. Everything that we've ever seen tells us we can't trust either of those two groups, whatever party there might be. And the only people who ever going to make any difference in terms of bringing about a better society in any kind of way and stamping out racism are when working class people unite together. And I'm really pleased that we're seeing people come out in massive numbers across the country, many places where they haven't done that before. But I think this feeds back to the last point that you made, Rania, about Gaza. Because people, I think, are linking this stuff to the fact that we've seen hundreds of thousands of people coming out on the streets actually every week in Britain, protesting about the genocide that's taking place in Gaza. And I don't think it's lost on people about the absolutely dreadful, incredibly, just awful, horrific treatment that's being meted out against the Palestinians. And they can see that it doesn't take much to look at some of the comments that Starmer makes, for example, where he finds it really easy to talk about anti-Semitism, and he should talk about anti-Semitism. But for some reason, he cannot bring himself to say that word, Islamophobia. He can't do it. And he's had so many chances to do it that he just won't, because he sees a difference as well. And by the way, this is somebody who can't deal with the racism within his own party, that an official report that his party called for by an eminent lawyer, he still hasn't dealt with that racism. So who's going to have confidence for him to deal with anything, frankly? The only people we should have confidence in is each other as working class people to stand up against racism.
No, I think that's very well put point, and I think it's very interesting to see the swiftness with which there is a growth of an anti-racist fight back coming forward. And I know there's more coming up with calls for big marches this Saturday as well by Stand Up to Racism. Well, Roger, as always, we really appreciate you having with us. Thanks for interrupting your holiday to give us this important context on a critically important set of events.
No problem. Thanks for having me.